Visits on the way, but did make it, so it's good to be here. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be here and consider this question, Impressions of Jesus, with us this evening. Thanks to the organisers for inviting me. I'm here with my colleague, David Robinson, who's actually an expert in early Christianity, a patristic scholar, so you may want to apply him with questions as well later. But the format of the evening is going to be that I'm going to speak to you on this subject for about 45 minutes and then take some of your questions. And then if any of you want to discuss things further afterwards, we will hang around for a short time. And there are some resources available to you. I know you've had a very brief introduction, but just so you've got some rough idea about who's talking to you this evening. I'm obviously a Christian. I'm a Christian apologist, as well as a pastor. I pastor a church in Toronto called Westminster Chapel. I'm the director of a Christian institute, educational institute called the Ezra Institute, and I've been helping people understand the Christian faith for about 20 years now, and I don't look old enough, but it is almost that length of time now that I've been talking to people about Christ and helping them understand and seek to explain how Jesus understood himself, how others have understood him, and how his claims compare with others. One of the noted military figures in history is Napoleon Bonaparte, and on one of his several periods of exile after being defeated gloriously by the British Navy, he spent a good deal of time meditating, thinking about the person of Jesus Christ. And this is what he said: "I know men, and I tell you that Jesus is not a man. Everything in him amazes me. His spirit outreaches mine, and his will confounds me. Comparison is impossible between him and any other being in the world. He is truly a being by himself. His ideas and his sentiments, the truth that he announces, his manner of convincing, are all beyond humanity and the natural order of things. His birth, the story of his life, the profoundness of his doctrine, which overturns all difficulties and is their complete solution, his gospel, the singularity of his mysterious being, his appearance, his empire, his progress through all centuries and kingdoms, all this to me is a prodigy, an unfathomable mystery. I see nothing here of man. Near as I may approach, closely as I may examine, all remains above my comprehension. Great with a greatness that crushes me, it is in vain that I reflect, all remains unaccountable. I defy you to cite another life like that of Christ." You saw some of the quotations on your screen there, some opinions from fellow students, but also one or two quotations from noted people who have made comments, famous people who have made comments about Jesus. One of the most important things to remember, though, when you come to ask the question, who really was Jesus Christ? And try and make your way through all the various impressions of Jesus that there are out there, the smorgasbord of ideas that there are about Christ, is to remember that none of us is completely neutral as we weigh up and assess the issues and the evidence. A number of things will invariably colour our judgment. We may have had a negative experience of Christianity in somewhere or another growing up. We may have serious questions about maybe there are Christian people that you know and you don't find them particularly people of integrity. There will be a number of things that possibly don't help us see this question clearly. Some of the issues will be philosophical as well. For example, for some people who are committed to a naturalistic perspective, a naturalistic philosophy about the world, no amount of evidence or argument about the person of Jesus will finally convince them. Not prophecy, not miracles, not the validity of the New Testament text, not what the early church thought about him, and so on and so forth. Nothing, because a naturalistic interpretation will always be preferred, because the possibility, perhaps, of the miraculous has been ruled out before we even come to an analysis of the evidence. In a sense, when we ask the question about who really was Jesus Christ, we're not simply asking about an isolated fact. We're not simply asking the question, well, did Jesus really perform miracles, or did Jesus really rise from the dead? We're actually asking a more fundamental, a more basic question. We're actually asking, in the end, about the meaning of all facts. Because we're asking about whether this world is governed by God, created by God, into which God has spoken through his Son, Jesus Christ, which is the claim of Christians, or not. And so we're also conscious of the fact that how we respond to the question, how we form finally our impression, may have an impact upon the rest of our lives. That's a bit of a scary thought as well. Anything that might potentially change our lives in some way or push us out of the comfort zone that we are in, invariably can position us in a hostile manner to the claims of Christ. Let me try and give a very simple illustration about how human beings, over a thumbnail sketch, how we have tended to look at the world over the centuries. The ancients, in many respects, when they considered these ultimate kinds of questions, considered the world in terms of world encounter. So when they sought knowledge about truth, they took for granted in many respects that they were encountering in some way or another the divine. Sometimes this was in the context of believing they were encountering powerful spirits at work. In the Hebrew nation, of course, it was directed towards a theistic conception of God. And so, but in most cultures, when the ground produced a harvest, or the wine was particularly good that year, or they felt the need to exercise or express gratitude, there would be sacrifices and offerings to God or to gods. There was a sense in which they thought that God is not the philosophical problem, but human beings are. And one of the most basic inventions of the ancient world was the plough. But you have to believe certain things about the world before you invent the plough. You have to believe that if you plough the ground, put seed in it, that a harvest will return to you in due time, and then you can plough the ground again, plant seed again, and a harvest will come in due time. So technologies often reflect our thinking as we develop our thinking. The ancient world invented the plough because they believed in the regularity, consistency of the natural order, and they thought to give thanks to God, in some cases gods, for this. The modern era has not been a time of world encounter, but the modern era, some say, began with Descartes. I think the seeds of it began earlier, but the French philosopher in the 17th century, Descartes, who in many respects sought to reposition Western thinking by saying, well, we shouldn't really begin in terms of the divine and God. We need to begin our quest for knowledge and understanding in terms of the self. I think, therefore I am. How can I reach any kind of certainty about truth? I mustn't begin with God, as some of the ancients have done. That was his chief critique of the ancients. But rather begin with the self and build to an understanding from there. Perhaps the greatest invention of the modern era was the telescope. It was an era of world viewing. The basic idea was that, well, man is really autonomous. He's independent. Human beings are somehow independent from the world, and we can stand back in rational objectivity and look at it, analyze it. Hans Lippershey's children in about 1608, I think, accidentally discovered that lenses could magnify things, and later that very simple bit of technology was trained on the skies by a Christian astronomer called Galileo. The initial objective of these scientists was to think God's thoughts after it, but progressively we began to think of dissecting the universe, and God became pushed to the peripheries. But our own age, the one in which we live, is not really one of world viewing anymore either, because we ran into a problem. We thought to ourselves, well, hang on a minute. Although this person and this philosopher and this thinker has certain ideas in their mind, and we say we need to begin the quest for knowledge with human beings, well, there's lots of us. Descartes might think that, and Leibniz might think that, and Spinoza thinks that, and so forth. But Uncle Tom Copley thinks that, and Sarah Jane thinks this, and so thinks that. So how do we discover what's valid or what's invalid? How can we know? And so our own time has been one, really, of an era of world-making, the ultra-modern context, where we don't really think of ourselves as sort of